Wanted to say hi and send their greetings to you. Now, I know that you have a podcast out now called The Reinvention of the DJ, and I've started to listen to it. First couple episodes in, and it took me right back to the memories I had growing up as a teenager. It really struck me when you mentioned how you were aware that this channel was a huge part of people's lives. And it was one of my best friends as a kid. So I always had Much on, like constantly. It helped shape me as an artist, and I truly felt like the VJs had a connection with the viewer. And what made you decide to get the gang together for these walks down memory lane?
Well, there's a bunch of different reasons. One of them was technology. So never before was it so easy for me to have these interviews because, you know, all these hosts live around North America right now. It's really hard to track them down. And I didn't want to start something that I couldn't do properly. So number one, because of COVID and lockdown and the emergence of Zoom and the increased technical finesse of the audio and the video that, for example, that we're on right now, it's so good that I was able to do it. So that was number one. Number two, back in the day when I worked at Much, don't get me wrong, I loved my job. I loved it. But there was something that irked me, which was a lot of people assumed that I was made by Much, which in fact is not accurate. And I don't think it's accurate for any of the on-air people. What Muchmusic did is they found people who were already music fans or already funny or already knowledgeable about performance. We were already someone of interest. And then Muchmusic put us together. And it is that sort of family of quirky, strong characters that was the basis for Muchmusic. So my back got up because I didn't like the fact that people assumed that Muchmusic made me. They didn't make me, they gave me an incredible platform and an incredible opportunity. But I and all the other VJs did the work. So when I left Much, I wanted to leave it behind. I needed to reinvent. It was important for me to prove to other people that I was more than just that girl from Muchmusic. And it took me a while to do it. Started many projects, all of which were quite successful. And I felt now today that I was ready to go back. I was ready to go back as an accomplished adult and ready to have conversations that are sometimes emotional with the people who I worked with in the past, and not necessarily worked with because, for example, Nam, I never worked with. She was on air after me. But we had a great opportunity to compare notes because there is something very hard to describe, the pressure that all of us were under. And again, I love my job. I'm not complaining, just a reality check of the intense pressure it was when you said you would go home every day and watch Muchmusic after school. Millions of people did. They were watching us. And remember, this was live TV with no script and no director. It was a huge responsibility for each of us, not only to represent Muchmusic well, but also ourselves. You know, like it is embarrassing when you make mistakes on camera, when you say the wrong thing, when you give misinformation and all the fans would come after you. That wasn't fun. But it taught all of us to be very confident, very strong. So to answer your question, I wanted to have those conversations with my peers. And I can only have those conversations with people who've experienced what I did. So there are only a select few of us, and that's what the Reinvention of the VJ podcast is about.
I always felt that you were very real with who you were as a person on screen. And pretty much everybody who was working there all had their, like you said, their quirkiness. And I think it's really, really great that you're being candid with each other about the things that maybe weren't so great there, or, you know, your learning experiences and the people you became after you were there. So,
yeah, I think that so far the best compliment that I've had from one of the listeners was they said, came for the stories, left with ideas. Because the show is more than just, you know, tell me about your time at Muchmusic. It's actually trying to understand the impact that we and Much Music as a whole had on Canadian culture, and also how Much Music had an effect on each of us in terms of our careers, and how it held some of us back, and some of us, it was a great way to open doors. And then each of us have had, very eclectic careers since leaving Much Music. And so I wanted to have those conversations about what it takes to reinvent. And I don't mean reinvent from a VJ to something else, but reinvent from working at one job and then finding a different job.
Mm-hmm.
Because that process is a challenge for everybody, no matter what job you've had. And I think in this climate of COVID, when a lot of people have had to really pivot, lots of jobs lost, lots of businesses closed, lots of forced reinvention, this is an important and timely discussion.
Mm-hmm. And you were and are a very strong, inspiring woman in media.
Thank you.
Did you feel that empowerment being the person on the screen, or what effect did your success, like, what effect did your success have on you? And did you realize that you had that effect on a generation of young women watching you?
Well, the first part, did I know that I was having an effect? I didn't know for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but I assumed that people, particularly young women, were watching me and I was becoming a role model. And I like that because I'm a good role model.
Yes.
I'm spicy enough. I'm sassy, got a strong backbone. I speak up, but I
See,
make, yep,
that's what I mean.
always speak up. And
Yeah.
I make good choices. And I think of others when I make my decisions in life. And I was very proud to be a spokesperson at the time for, I don't know if you remember this, but it was the Really Me campaign, which was with the government. And it was a campaign, an advertising campaign to stop kids from doing drugs.
Hmm.
I don't do drugs and I've never done drugs. And it's interesting how people assume the rock and roll lifestyle came with all this sort of partying. The irony is that I never partied. I never partied. I didn't want to lose control. I wanted to be in control. When
Hmm.
I went to a club, I would have a drink or two, nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to have my wits about me because if something weird happened, which, a lot of jerky guys would come over and start, drooling on me, I needed to be on the ball. And I wasn't at Much Music to party. I
Hmm.
was at Much Music to interview artists and understand the magic that they have, and to curate music for an entire generation. I wanted that to be what girls aspire to: a strong, focused, ambitious woman with a backbone who loves to dress up and express herself.
Hmm.
You're smiling. Does that make
I'm
you
smiling.
happy?
It makes me very happy, especially
Good.
when you talk about fashion. Did you get to make your own fashion choices or any regretful decisions you might have made in fashion back in the day?
Well, you could tell me if they were regretful or not, because it's all how it lands. But
Yeah.
um, for me, wardrobe was a really important part of the job because it was a visual medium,
Mhm.
and the way I looked told part of the story. So, for example, I grew up with Cyndi Lauper. When I say grew up, I mean I was already on air when Cyndi Lauper emerged.
Yeah.
But her fashion sensibility said a lot about who she was: that she was eclectic, that she was loud, that she was brash, that she was one of a kind. Same thing for, that's my son walking downstairs. Same thing with Madonna. I also respected her self-confidence and owning her own sexuality.
Mm.
At the same time, I really related to Chrissy Hind, who
Ah,
was tough girl. Um, and I feel like I'm tough, but more tough in business, more tough with an opinion, but soft when it comes to making the world a better place.
and still nurturing to, like, you have a family to take care of now, and yeah, no, it's good to be a woman who strikes that balance. And yeah, I find it very inspiring. Now, was the Much environment an inviting place to be at the time? It appeared rather large in size when you watched it on TV. But I was thinking about when you had things going on there, like intermittent interactives and the electric circus, and it totally changed because all of a sudden people filled the rooms. Now, how would you guys go to do that, set it up that way, and then revert it back to a work environment? Because I would always feel like random people are too close to the equipment. And like, that's the impression I
Yeah.
got from watching it.
Well, you're correct. It really was it was just a big empty room, and it wasn't really that big. And definitely the TV probably made it look bigger, just as the TV made me look taller. But we just squished people in and we moved desks. It was just like a play space. And
Yeah.
we just used it and just used and reused the space. And in many ways, Much Music has been a leader. One of the ways that they were a leader was redefining what a studio is, which was a working environment. That never happened before. When you had television, you had a studio, and then you had the desks outside the studio. Never before. And I challenge you to find any other place really in the world who did what we did, which was to set up the lights and a grid over all of our desks. And we all just lived our lives and did our jobs. And when we were live, we didn't really, like, if we weren't on camera, if it wasn't our shift, we didn't really know when someone was live. And we weren't encouraged to be quiet either. So when you were on camera, you were competing with the cacophony in a regular office. And it was louder than most offices because it was a creative space. So it was challenging, and it wasn't claustrophobic, but it was tight for sure.
Sound engineers must have really done their job, because I would never hear like random noises around the
You
room.
wouldn't? You
No,
wouldn't?
no, I didn't. Not that I can
Wow.
recall.
Oh, I remember like phones ringing and oh,
Phones, yes, but like not like random people shouting or doing anything too wild or crazy that I can
well,
recall.
maybe you didn't acknowledge it because we acknowledged it as when we were on camera. Like if somebody yelled something in interrupting us, we would respond to it. So it became part of the show. And much like improv, when you study at Second City or something, they teach you to just accept everything that goes around and just go with it. So we all learned to do that as well.
What was your typical work day like? How did you start your day? How did it go?
We had two shifts. There was 12 to 4 or 4 to 8.
Mm-hmm.
And the night before, I would do research. So I would get my shift. I would get a rundown of the videos that I'd be responsible for introducing, and then I would have to assemble a bunch of magazines and or books and or articles and lug them home, because this is pre-internet. So we had to do everything manually. I would like turn the pages and look for articles that I could somehow connect to the videos that I was playing. So we all were responsible for our own research and our own, not script. There was no script, but our own stories. So that's basically my life was a lot of research, shopping for outfits. That was a tough part of the job. Coming in and doing the shift, sometimes going out and doing shoots outside, meaning like additional interviews or field work, and hanging out on Queen Street.
I really liked it when you guys went outside and were like in the sunshine interacting with everybody too. I always thought that was nice to bring it outdoors and talk with people, especially things like Speaker's Corner. How many videos a week would come in from Speaker's Corner? And did someone actually sit through there and like go through each video?
That was like a separate department. It wasn't actually part of Much Music. So I don't really know. I know that it was beloved. But I also know that Speaker's Corner was just one part of the why Much Music was so adored. And it's because the audience was as important as us. And the audience, we tried as much as possible to include the audience in everything that we did. the window, obviously, where you could stand outside and watch the interviews. People were invited in all the time to take a look and go on tours and be in the background of shots. Obviously, the interactive and the I&I shows, and then of course the MTV or the video awards outside. People were invited, and then all the request shows. Now there was again no internet, so it was clunky. It was manual. People would mail us or fax us their requests, but they became part of the show. And phones, we would have conversations, live conversations. So it was, and we were told, the on-air people, that none of us were more important than the audience, and to not start to, for us not to begin acting like stars, because we know better than anyone in the audience.
Yeah, everybody seemed like egoless to me. Like I felt like the majority of what I saw was very down to earth, and it made it more inviting.
That's because we're Canadian.
It probably has a lot to do with it. Did you write your own interviews since you had to do all the studying yourself?
We did nothing. No one helped me do anything. So any question you ask, the answer is I did it.
It's fantastic. Did you ever participate in those Muchmusic video dance parties that would go around? Like I know I met Master T one year and he came out to my town.
I had a different one. So I'm kind of an entrepreneur. So myself and a guy named Jeff, who had a company called Pink's Productions, and I did the Erica Ehm Muchmusic Roadshow, which almost paid for my house. I did so many of those dances and had such a great time. I got to meet everybody. So I would drive like 2 o'clock in the morning, driving home from some remote location. It was a great time.
And then you get to know the fans a little bit better too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they got to know me.
What kind of weird things were people doing outside the windows, and were they distracting sometimes? How distracting did you find that? Like, obviously they were like having a good time when you, especially like trying to get your attention. Was there any time somebody did like really odd things or something that would make you lose focus on what you were doing?
Nope. Nothing would make me lose focus.
Yeah.
I think each of us acquired a skill to just block out any sort of distraction. Unless we wanted to acknowledge it, we just did what we did. So no one has ever distracted me to the point that I couldn't do my job. And mostly they were just waving and it was awesome. We waved back and we put them in the shot. We would stand and there was gels on the window so that we could shoot out, because usually you can't shoot into a window. It's too bright.
So there's no glare. That's basically
right.
Yeah.
And so we were able to have people in the shots with us all the time.
Did anyone you interview ever make you feel intimidated or you were overwhelmed by the situation?
Oh, I'm sure there were many. I can't remember who specifically, but I know that, every interview is another opportunity to fail or succeed. And there was just a pressure to rock it each time. So, I guess the first big interview that I did when I first started was Tears for Fears, when they had Shout and Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And I was the newbie, but they landed on my shift. And I know that everybody was very, very concerned that I would make a fool of myself. And thankfully I didn't, probably just barely. And they were very polite. So the earlier days, probably more so, I was much more nervous. Duran Duran when they came in, when it was chaos. But it was more exciting than it was intimidating. It was just another opportunity to prove myself and to improve my skills.
Which interview meant the most to you?
Well, I do remember one moment when I interviewed Sting, and this was not live. This was at the Sky Dome in Toronto, backstage. And we did really, I guess, a good interview, whatever. I don't remember the stuff that I asked him, quite frankly. All I remember is at the end of the interview, he said, and I quote, "You're very beautiful." And I turned around to my cameraman, Dave, and I said, "Did you get that?" He goes, "Nah, turned off the camera." That was the most memorable one. And Sting said I was most
sweet.
beautiful after the interview, meaning he enjoyed the interview. And I find that people usually are more attractive when you like them or when they are interesting. So
Yes.
I take it as a huge score.
Oh yeah, definitely makes more of an impact if it's not before the interview, right?
Yeah.
How did you feel when Muchmusic seemed to turn into a reality show network?
Oh, I was way gone by then. I had
Yeah,
kids. I
yeah,
was running my YMC
yeah.
website.
Because you left in the mid '90s, right, or
Oh,
towards?
yeah, I left in 94. So
Yeah.
I was much, the original Much. And when I left, I literally didn't turn it on for
Hmm.
like ever.
Fair enough. When did you become an author? At what point did that start happening for you, doing the writing?
I wrote a book, I think it was in 92, called She Should Talk, which was a series of interviews with exceptional young women who were in the process of realizing their dreams. We were and continue to lack Canadian mentors for young women. So I found 10 of them and put a book together. So that was, I think it was 92, 93. And then I wrote a kid's book about 5 years ago called Mischievous Mom Goes to the Art Gallery, starring my kids. I wrote that with Rebecca
Wonderful.
Eckler. And yeah, so those were the 2 books I've written so far.
And your current project, let's talk about, called Out of the Books. How did this come into being? And you created this project remotely, correct?
Yeah, this was very special. I received an email from a woman that I know who been around the business for a long time, so I know lots of people. She is head of production, I believe, at the Jim Henson Company, and a good friend of hers was working on a project that she thought I'd be perfect for. He's a very accomplished songwriter, composer, and a jingle writer in LA, and he's worked with a lot of really respected people. He had this concept to bring back fairy tales in a new way. So he had written about 18 pop songs. Each pop song is a fairy tale. So he wanted to take it one step further and to write musical theater, write a play for families that would somehow incorporate all those songs. But that's not easy. So he went to a professional, that's me, and he asked if I could come up with a concept for a show where it would make sense to have a bunch of songs that are fairy tales being sung, and to come up with a premise that would be appealing to parents and their kids, which I think is really important because I hate patronizing stuff for families.
Yes.
And so I did. It's essentially a jukebox musical, much like, for example, Mamma Mia, or what was the one for Bat Out of Hell is another one. So there were already existing songs, and then the playwrights wrote a show that incorporated those songs. That's what I did. And so the result is a show called Out of the Books. Hopefully it will become a franchise. The play was written much like we're doing right now, which is virtually, because he was based in LA. I would be tasked to write certain things. I'd come back and I'd read it to him, and then, we'd go back and forth. We were about to go into production to debut the show in Scotland at the Edinburgh Fringe Fest, and then COVID hit. Yeah. So our dreams were pretty much decimated. But rather than give up, we decided to pivot. And I rewrote the script, turned it into an 8-part video series, and it's now debuted on YouTube. And it's way better. It's way more innovative.
It's very engaging. I really enjoyed
Thank you. What did you
watching.
like about it?
I watched the first episode, and the characters and the people playing them had a lot of energy, and they were very young. And like I can see kids would be able to connect to those people.
Yeah. And the most fun was dreaming up these characters who are all they're all fairy tale characters, but they're all different than any other fairy tale you've ever read.
Yeah.
And the storyline, I think, is pretty engaging because the librarian, who is actually a magical cat, is in charge of taking care of the treasury of tales where all fairy tales are housed. But the treasury of tales is crumbling because families today are not listening or reading fairy tales the way they used to. And so she had to think out of the books and come up with a way for families to fall in love with fairy tales again. And this play is that story. And the characters are quirky and unique. And together, I can't tell you what happens, but they do come up with a pretty exciting way to save fairy tales.
Yeah, so listeners, I'm going to be giving you all the information on where to go to the YouTube channel to watch and bring your family together and enjoy. That leads me into a question from one of our listeners, Andrew, because he wanted to ask, you've written a number of books now. Do you think children's stories are evolving with the times? Are current hot topics like Me Too movement, LGBTQ, racism, and etc. being introduced to kids in a way that they can understand?
Oh, yeah. I'm not up on all the latest books.
Yeah.
Because my kids are older. My son is 20 and my daughter is 17. So, I'm just, I'm sort of out of that preschool and young kid age, but I can guarantee you that there are extraordinary books out there. If you search online, you will find amazing books because there are so many people who are passionate about these topics and you can self-publish now. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are definitely books to inspire kids and to help them understand complicated ideas at an early age. I mean, isn't that the point?
Yeah.
Is to get kids to normalize all these things with kids early on. And so it just becomes a part of our regular culture. Like, for example, in my play, I have a character called T-Roll, and he's part elf and part troll. And obviously I did that because there's a lot of kids who are mixed race right now, or their friends are mixed race, and it's perfectly cool. Mm-hmm. And it just makes you more interesting because you've got, two different backgrounds and traditions to draw from. So yeah. There was that character. And then we have another character called Melody the Blue Fairy. And Melody has always been told that she's the wrong shade of blue. Yes, I know. How can you be the wrong shade of blue? Well, all the other fairies laughed at her. And then throughout the show, she comes to understand that she is just the right shade of blue. So those kinds of, complicated ideas that are simplified for kids.
And ultimately building up their self-esteem, no matter how they feel about themselves.
Right.
Letting them know that you're perfectly fine. You're a beautiful person.
You're just the right color.
Now, I was going to ask you too. You're very involved in social media marketing and seem to have embraced tech very early, especially into the internet. Did you jump into the internet early in your career, or were you using it right when it came out?
Well, I'm not an early tech adopter, but I also needed to reinvent. And I had launched a TV show called Yummy Mummy, which was broadcast on Life Network and Discovery Health around the world. And it was a show for moms, for modern women, to celebrate and commiserate life as a woman, which is challenging to say the least. No one was talking about that. So I started that conversation. After 2 years, the show was wrapped and I wanted to connect with moms, really selfishly, because I needed a social life. I needed to meet other like-minded women. And so I started my little website called Yummy Mummy Club, which is now called ymc.ca. And I grew it into the largest online platform for moms in Canada. And in doing so, I realized how many brands and businesses want to connect with moms.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am one of the the earlier, I guess you'd call them inventors of influencer marketing,
Mm-hmm.
where I had 500 families across the country who were helping us amplify programs that we created to connect brands and moms. And then I launched an agency called M and Co, which I still run today, where I help brands connect with moms in meaningful ways. So not market at them, but market with them and help them discover their products and use their products. Yes, using social media, but telling the right story and making it meaningful and making it resonate with women.
Making them part of the process and including them in the solutions they need in their lives.
Yeah, listening to your audience and finding ways to help them, not push a product on them.
That's good. Yeah, I can't stand that kind of patronizing thing. So yeah,
Me
absolutely.
too. Jane is a soccer mom.
Yeah.
You know, they actually, marketing agencies actually, or advertising agencies or brands actually talk like that. It's like, I'm not a soccer mom, but my son played soccer for 1 year. And you know what I mean? Like they have all these sort of stereotypes, but that, as soon as you start stereotyping moms, you're in big trouble, because the women that I know are complex and educated and interesting, and they all have strong voices now because of social media. Got to be careful what you say to moms.
Who is one of your broadcasting heroes?
Well, I could give you one from before and now. I would say before it would be Jeannie Becker, who I recently interviewed for my podcast. And it was quite an emotional conversation because I used to be Jeannie's assistant 30 odd years ago. And she is formidable. She is brave. She is hardworking. She, you know, bashes every stereotype that there is about women in broadcasting. And she fearlessly jumps on any medium and does the work. So I love her. And more recently, my other modern day hero is Amber MacArthur. You can find her on social media at Amber Mac. She was I guess she was a tech reporter early on in her career. And she realized that mainstream media was, you know, collapsing. And so she started her own. And she is a one-woman broadcasting empire. She is a master of social media. She is up on all the latest trends. She has like 1 million followers on Twitter and all her social platforms. And yet she is one of the most down-to-earth, caring, hardworking women that I know. So she is my hero. And she knows it.
How long has she been broadcasting now?
Oh, I'm guessing she's been around for about 20 years.
Yeah.
And she very quietly and methodically is building an empire. And I just have the utmost respect for her.
I'm going to go learn more about her. So I appreciate
Tell her
you.
that Erica sent you.
I will. Have you kept any memorabilia from back in those Much days?
Let me see. Do I have anything here?
I noticed you definitely had, it's cool that you have the books and everything laid out there.
Yeah, I don't really have that much. I have one of my hats from my hat collection. I had one of my leather jackets here, and I think one of my kids' friends might have walked off with it or something. I do have one of the original. I have a couple of my original jackets. I have the jacket that I wore the first day on Much somewhere. I don't even know where it is because we're really messy. I don't have much. It's kind of sad because part of it was when I got married, I moved houses and I just purged. Now I regret it. Oh, I have a couple of pairs of jeans from back in the day, which I can't fit into, and my daughter can wear now.
Oh, nice. That kind of leads into this next question that I ask all our guests. What type of clothing items, food items, toys, etc., makes you nostalgic for the 90s?
Nothing. I'm not nostalgic about the 90s, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
It was a time of transition for me because I left in 94, did a lot of TV with other networks. And then in 99 got married, and then had my son in 2000 when my life really reinvented. So I think the 90s were kind of a time of transition for me. So pop culture was not really big in my life. The irony of this is like, I didn't watch a lot of, what are those? My son is so nice. He took off his boots so that he wouldn't make noise. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Sweet.
Yeah, the 90s were not defining for me really in any way. I live in my head. And especially in that time, I really lived in my head, and I just was doing the work.
Creating your future goals and everything. So
yeah, and just doing things that I love to do.
What fulfills you the most now?
Making something from nothing.
Yeah.
And doing it with a team of people. I really love collaborating. I love working with people. So every project that I have or every business that I run, I have one or two people who are my people. And that's what I love. It's kind of like my work is my social life because we all create something together. So I have a group of people that help me on the podcast. I have a group of people who help me run my agency. And each of them makes me a better person because I learn from them.
And what kind of causes do you support?
Mostly mental health, specifically teen mental health. My daughter has had a fair share of her challenges, and it's really beautiful watching her grow up and figure life out. And she's lucky because she has parents who get it, and we were able to get her help. And not every teenager has access to that kind of stuff. So
this is true.
Mental health is really important, especially these days. And now with COVID, there's additional pressure and isolation with teens, and it's really troubling.
Yeah, it's important that there's more resources available right now. I'm worried that that's kind of getting overlooked by our governments. Maybe not so much federally, but provincially, we're having a hard time in Alberta. Yeah.
Well, we don't even want to start talking about, provincial politics because I just shake my head at politicians these days and wonder where their priorities are.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, we're going to come out of this. We're going to be all right. But in the meanwhile, it's good for us to find things to focus on, to be creative. That's why I enjoy doing this podcast. I started it at a time where I felt it was really helpful for my mental health. Keeps me focused on something positive. So thank you for being part of that.
Did you start this podcast during COVID?
I started it at the end of January this year. Yeah. So it just kind of like led up into the timing being right. I had already been putting my crossing my T's, dotting my I's, getting ready to create it. And then it hit. So honestly, it was almost easier to connect with people because everybody had learned how to use Zoom and learned how to use Skype over the last few months. So, yeah.
Way better.
Crazy timing, but it's definitely helped my mental health during isolation. And thank you so much for spending time with me today. It was really a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm very inspired by you. So thank you.
Well, just be strong and be yourself, and you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean to make that rhyme. Wow, that was weird.
It's all good.